Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad Pro 11-inch and the 12.9-inch models from 2018 and see how these specific iPads hold up in 2023. Now these specific iPads were the iPad Pro 3rd generations, whatever you want to call them, and these were some of the biggest changes Apple has ever made to any iPad ever. This was probably the biggest change from one generation to the other of any iPad, and it was probably one of the biggest generation changes from one Apple product to the other, including the ones with MacBooks, maybe besides the M1 models, iPhones. I mean, this was a big change for sure, and I'm very happy, Apple ended up going down this road. Now, if you want to buy some iPads I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad Pro, this specific model came out in 2 different versions. So it came out in that, massive 12 plus inch model, but also that 11-inch model as well. Now these were kind of different designs and different types of panels from what they were before. So for one, Apple was removing that home button and they were giving us this bezel-less type of design. So this kind of matched in line with what they were doing with their iPhones during this moment. It was interesting, they did not give us a notch on these iPads, and they still haven't given us notches on any iPads yet too, which makes me think Apple may end up doing it in the future. They've now done this with MacBooks and MacBook Airs, so it's only a matter of time before Apple actually does this with their iPads. Now with their 11-inch iPad Pro, the thing with this specific iPad was that it was fairly small in the hand for the big panel you were getting, and why I like this 11-inch model so much is because it is the one I use almost on an everyday basis. I wouldn't say everyday, but whenever I use an iPad, I'm most likely using something like an iPad Pro 11-inch because it's that good of a model. I think Apple did a great job with it. I think the panels look great. There's not like a crazy amount of bezel around this specific device either. And those things are very, very cool and important to me. So having a ProMotion display as well is insane too. Now for those of you who don't know, ProMotion did not get debuted with this iPad. It was the iPad right before this at 10.9, the 10.5-inch model. And by having an iPad that actually did have this sort of display was amazing. An iPad that has a beautiful display, comes in multiple different variations, and has a higher refresh rate than the other iPads is honestly very cool. And it made things feel so much smoother and so much faster. And what's so funny is even now to this day, when I still use iPads that actually do have, ProMotion displays, and I compare it to my 2018 model, including the M2 iPads that have came out recently too, this iPad Pro still holds up there. It is still a very good performing iPad, and it still has a ton of power within as well. And those types of things are super cool and super important to me, and I'm really happy Apple kept the ProMotion display here. I'm getting kind of ahead of myself. On the bottom, we do have that standard USB Type-C port too, which also debuted on this specific iPad as well. So again, you have to keep in mind with these things. For Apple to go ahead and make these types of iPads and for them to also have USB Type-C is really, really cool. So that is awesome. This thing also has a Headphone Jack Too, which is pretty cool. On the back, you have that standard Apple logo, which always looked great. I always love the way this Apple, these iPads looked on the back. You'll also have that camera setup on the top left corner too. Very good looking iPad camera. I'm glad Apple went ahead and made this type of sensor on here because again, it matched in line to basically what some of the good iPhone cameras of that year were bringing. And I'm glad Apple, went ahead and brought them here too, which was pretty awesome. So on the outside, this iPad, 10 out of 10. And even now in 2023, almost 5 years since this iPad's release, it is still a very good iPad and it still looks beautiful. It still has a ton of capability. And those are some very important things that kind of stand out to me with this iPad. So in terms of that, I would say in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up for me. It's still a very good looking iPad for sure. So that does kind of bring us straight into the camera side of things. So this iPad, single 12 megapixel camera on the back, and on the front, it was a 7 megapixel standard lens. Now here's the thing with this camera, on the back, having that 12 megapixel standard camera, I think was very good during that moment. And the reason for that was because this camera matched in line pretty much with something like the, iPhone XR. Now the iPhone XR was not the best camera of that time, but it was a good enough camera for Apple to go ahead and kind of, let us have inside of this specific iPad to kind of showcase to us what iPads were basically capable of during that moment. Now was this a good iPad camera? Yes. Was it great? I would say kind of. I think, like I said, Apple did a good job. It could have probably been better, but it definitely was a good camera, so I was not complaining about that at all during that moment. Now, I will say something like of course, the iPhone XS was out during this time, and I'm sure Apple could have went ahead and added some sort of better camera there too. But I do think at the end of the day, an iPad camera like something like this is still very good, still very relevant, and that in and of itself deserves a lot of praise as well. So from the camera side, very good camera. I'm still a humongous fan of this specific lens as well for sure. Now moving on to the software and the longevity side of things, this specific iPad debuted with iOS 12. It was able to get iPadOS 16, which is currently what it's on, and recently iPadOS versions have been all over the place. So with this specific iPad, you would think that this thing's approaching, 5 years old. It may start showing its age. It may start having like a outdated chipset very soon. But I'm going to tell you some things. For one, Apple is very, very behind in kind of letting iPads go. The oldest supported iPad on iPadOS 16, I think still has like an Apple A9 chip or Apple A9X chip inside. This thing's chipset is like 3 years newer than that thing. So that is an insane thing to keep in mind. The iPhone 6s chipset is basically the same thing inside of the lowest supported iPad right now. So you really have to keep that in the back of your head, because if you're going to be getting something like this specific iPad, you will still be getting a very good iPad with a, long supported future ahead of it. I would not be surprised if this thing, still ends up getting software support around maybe like 3 to 4 years from now. So that is some really crazy stuff to think about there too. Personally for me, I think something like the iPad, M2 iPad Pros, like M1 iPad Pros may be better choices. But this thing still has a lot of software updates ahead of it, and that is another reason why I look at these types of iPads, and I am massive fans of them for sure. Now this does directly bring me into the performance side of things. So this iPad has that Apple A12 Bionic chip. So this iPad has that Apple A12X Bionic chip inside of it with 4 gigabytes of RAM, but it does go up to 6 gigabytes of RAM on the top tier model. So with this type of iPad's performance, I still think it's a very, very good performing iPad, which is crazy. You wouldn't think an iPad of this day and age that's this, powerful would be this old. So for some things that I do with my iPads, I do fairly basic things. Like I don't go overboard with my iPads at all anymore. Maybe I used to in like 2016 or 2017. But in this day and age, I try to avoid those types of things. And the reason for that is because my MacBook pretty much does all the heavy lifting. But with this type of iPad, you are not only getting that USB-C port where you can dock it up and connect it to other accessories, making this thing a very possible like iPad computer replacement, but also this thing supports Apple Pencil too. So if you're somebody who wants to go ahead and basically have a, note-taking experience on their iPad, but you're going to be getting that type of capability on this type of iPad on the iPad Pro 3rd Gen, and that is another awesome reason why I look at this type of iPad, and I'm a huge fan of it as well. It's not a perfect iPad, and it's not even like the perfect computer replacement anymore, but depending on what you want to do, I think Apple did a tremendous job here, and I think Apple did a great job with the way they went through with this specific iPad. The things that it kind of is limited in sometimes nowadays is like, for one, sometimes I would say with its performance side of things, like it may overheat sometimes, it may be a little glitchy. It's not the fastest performing chipset anymore, but I still think it's a great performing chipset, and I think for its age, it's still fairly solid for sure. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is, I think Apple did a great job with this specific iPad. It wouldn't be the first iPad I would recommend buying anymore, but I do think if you want to go and buy one, this is a good choice. It's not perfect anymore, but if you want a cheap one that's still going to be supported for many years, I think this is not a no-brainer, but it's definitely one of those iPads I would recommend buying. So that kind of covers it up there as well. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.